Hi, I'm Ben, and today we're going to make a sofa using just one sheet of plywood and these three power tools. I'm using sanded pine plywood. It comes in a 4 foot by 8 foot panel, and my friends over at Kreg sent me this handy little carrier. I don't have a workbench big enough for a whole sheet of plywood, so I just put some 2x4s down on the floor so I don't cut the floorboards. You can do a lot with a circular saw, and I recommend getting a trim board from Home Depot, preferably a straight one like MDF, and just using a couple of these $1 spring clamps to clamp this guide in place. I'll put a link to a PDF with the measurements in the description, but I got started just by cutting the full sheet into a bunch of rectangles. The legs are where it starts to get interesting. I like doing angled legs where basically I'm cutting a bunch of triangular type pieces of plywood and then laminating them together to make nice, strong, sturdy legs that don't look as basic as typical rectilinear geometry. I'm not using a guide here, I'm just following the line. And there's two parts to this. One, I check that little notch at the front of my Ryobi Circular Saw, and I just make sure the pencil line is right in the center. Now that's just one part of it. I also have to keep an eye on the blade. So I just go slow and keep checking back and forth. For the leg pieces, I'm laminating 3 layers of 3/4 inch thick plywood. But lining up the edges for 3 pieces at once is a little bit tricky. And even just lining up 2 pieces, it can be a little bit slippery if you put on too much glue. So I start just by doing 2 layers. I use the $1 squeeze clamps to hold the pieces together. And then I just drive in a few screws to hold everything in place. The screw heads will be hidden by the third and final panel for these leg pieces. Now for the backrest, originally I thought I was going to go 3 thick. But as I was making it, I realized that 2 layers would be plenty strong enough for a backrest. So for these screw heads, I'm going to have to use wood putty to cover them up. I let the glue cure for about an hour and a half before adding on the third layer. Freehand cuts aren't perfect, so there's about 1/8 of an inch overhang on some of the edges. That's okay. It's not that hard to just sand the edges with an orbital sander to bring everything nice and flush. Now, if you have a router with a flush trim bit, this can be done even faster. But you absolutely don't need one. An orbital sander is plenty. But I would just start with an aggressive grit like 60 and then work your way up to 150 or 220. I had some pencil marks and a little bit of glue smudges left over on the pieces, so I just sanded them all over with 220 grit sandpaper, and I just rounded over the edges just a little bit. I'm not going with a full radius, just about 1/8 of an inch. To assemble the legs, I just measured about 1.5 inches in and drew a few tick marks. This gives me alignment marks so I know where to put those front legs, and then I just glued and screwed them together. Now I did have to use 3 1/8 inch long finish screws for this process since, well, I'm dealing with pieces that are 2 1/4 inches thick. The leg assemblies need to be opposite of each other. So for these kind of processes, I'm always making sure that I align the original piece next to the second one. So I make sure that I don't make 2 of the exact same leg and have inconsistent layering from the outside. What's cool about this leg design is that you could adjust the angle of the seat by choosing how much to cut off the front leg. I want just a very slight incline, so I just cut off a little bit. Once I cut the first piece, I just traced the mark onto the second piece and trimmed that as well. For aesthetic reasons, I'm having the front legs go on the outside edges of the sofa and the backrest pieces going on the inside. That just gives me a little bit of 3-dimensional layering that I think looks really nice with this angular geometry. Now, if you wanted everything to be flat and in plane for the 2 side panels, you could use a Kreg pocket hole jig and screw these together in plane. This 5-inch wide strip is going to be a support underneath the seat to keep the plywood from bending too much when a bunch of people are sitting on it. However, 5 inches is a little bit overkill. I updated the design to reduce this to 3 inches so that the backrest can be a little bit taller. I tried to wood putty as I went because it's going to be easier to sand this putty flush before I attach the seat board. You don't need glue for the seat board. I like it because it makes everything a little bit more sturdy, but there's enough thickness in the leg panels that you could get away with just screws. I used some scrap pieces of plywood to cut some blocks that were the same width, just so that I'd have a nice easy place to set the backrest before screwing it in place. On my first attempt, I screwed it a little bit too low, and then I went back and adjusted it and made it a little bit higher. All right, pretty much done. I just went over the whole thing with my Orbital sander in 220 grit. I rounded over all the edges, sanded all the wood putty nice and flush, and now I'm ready for some finish. Clean, lint-free rags are one of the most important things to have around the workshop. You really want to remove all the dust before adding any sort of finish. For the finish itself, I'm going with Maker Brand Simple Finish. It's a plant-based wood and oil finish. It's super easy. No sanding in between coats. One coat pretty much takes care of it all. You just apply a really thick coat of this oil, let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then take a clean rag and rub out the excess. It brings out the color of the wood, and it's a nice natural way to protect your woodworking pieces. Sleek, modern sofas can be quite expensive, and I've never been that good of an upholsterer, so I really like these slim cushions from the Simple Cushion Company. They're well made, super durable, easy to clean, and you can get a set of these 6-foot long cushions in a nice vegan leather finish for under $200 because right now we're having a 30% off sale. So check that link in the description. The goal for this project was to achieve an affordable modern sofa design using just one sheet of plywood. But you could adapt this design if you want to go over that arbitrary limit. So for example, if you wanted built-in side tables, you could have a longer board for the seat that extends out past the cushions and creates nice little modern built-in side tables. The same concept could be adapted to fit cushions of different sizes, since the leg panels are really just made of 3 pieces, glued and screwed together. Very pleased with how it came out. I like a very loungy sofa where the angle of the backrest is pretty low. But you could just change the angle of this and have another little facet, which I still think would look good with the geometry, and that would give you a little bit more of an upright seating position. One of the other things I like about the project is the cost. The cheapest sofa you can get at IKEA is about $325, $350, and they're not that good, and they're made out of materials that aren't going to really last a long time. With this, even at current plywood prices, which are kind of exorbitant, you're talking about maybe $60 to $70 if you account for finish and glue and screws. Only a handful of screws though, really. And with the sort of vegan leather cushions, which are now on sale at the Simple Cushion Company, link in the description, you could do this whole sofa for about $250. And unlike the IKEA one, this one is more customizable and is going to last a lot longer. Now we didn't use all the sheet of plywood. There's a few pieces left over. Originally I thought I was going to go 3 layers deep for the back supports, but once I started looking at it, I didn't really need it. So you could probably pull off, I mean it would be a pretty janky coffee table, but you could probably make a small coffee table to go with the sofa and still be on just one sheet of plywood. So as much as I like angular modern plywood furniture, I kind of think it's nice from an interior design standpoint to mix in some different shapes and texture. That's why for one of our next videos, we're going to show you how to make this little concrete coffee table. And the only tool you're going to need to add, a hot glue gun. So subscribe, coming soon.